Good morning. So this is a presentation of cluster-aware patching, aka application-aware patching, with BMC Server Automation and Threat Director. So take you kind of quickly through this. We had a conversation this week, as we have in the past, with a number of customers that want to figure out how they can do service-aware patching, and how they can do cluster-aware patching. So where's the challenge? The challenge is in failovers and restarts. So if you want to patch a cluster and keep the cluster up the whole time, you need to be able to, if you have an active cluster or an active standby cluster, you need to be able to move services around, shut applications down safely, start them back up, and basically move these different components around long before you actually get around to doing your patching. So BMC makes a great product called Threat Director that lets you line up your patching and remediation activities with the vulnerabilities that are coming over from your security operations people. And they do just a great job of identifying the vulnerabilities that are in the environment, and then it's kind of up to the rest of the team to figure out how to get those vulnerabilities remediated. And one of the things that gets in the way of that sometimes is how to effectively do this in clustered environments or with complex applications that need to be shut down in sequence and started back up. So since Threat Director has this great capability to package remediations, customer challenged us and said, okay, how can we use this, but also use it in a clustered or application environment? How do we tie it all together, and how do we make it easy, operator friendly, user friendly, something that doesn't require a lot of overhead to maintain? And so what we said is, we kind of broke it down into two major components, right? There's the before actions. We got to shut those application components down in the appropriate order. In an active standby configuration, maybe we have to fail the cluster over to running on the other node so that we can patch this one. Or in an active or multi-node configuration, maybe we need to just shut down this one node that we're working on. Now, once we're done doing our patching, then we're going to need to, we're either going to need to bring this node back online, or fail the cluster back to this node, or restart the application components in the appropriate order. If we shut down in a particular order, we're probably going to bring back up in functionally the reverse order. So what's the value? If we do this right, this process will easily scale to use several kinds of failover or application restart processes. What that means is, ideally, and as a number of customers have told us, they want to bake the shutdown and startup components sort of off into one part, either into a script or a batch job or another orchestrated process. And they want to be able to swap that process in and have it all basically be, shutdown and startup. And, they can let their cluster specialists figure out what shutdown and startup means without having to tightly couple those actions to this. The other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to stand up quickly. So, we could do very complicated processes. We could do very, very, very simple processes that are relatively expensive to maintain. We're shooting for kind of a nice middle ground. We want to keep it flexible enough that we can reuse the same components over and over again, but we want to make it powerful enough that it's not something where you have to maintain and go create the whole process from scratch for every new release. So the last part of this that's super powerful is the vulnerability assessment, basically the Threat Director actions of looking at the vulnerabilities in the environment, of preparing the remediations, and then setting that up for execution, are all going to be presented in the very user-friendly Threat Director and Operator portal. So how do we implement that for this demo? So we're going to use Threat Director to create targeted remediations, just like you would for any other remediation that you're going to do based on vulnerability scan data. for the servers in this cluster. We're then going to build out a batch process to tie in the existing shutdown, deploy, and startup components. So that deploy component is going to get built by Threat Director, and the shutdown and startup are already in the environment. We're also going to leverage server properties to find the app shutdown and app startup processes and identify the cluster by using using some different server properties in here. These shutdown and startup components are implemented here as NSH scripts, but they could certainly also be batch jobs or almost any other kind of job that makes sense. Once we've built out this process, we're going to present it back in the portal for the operators to execute or schedule. We can also leverage the newer maintenance window information or server properties for scheduling, but that's not shown in this demo, more for time than anything else. So as we said, failover and app shutdown. We're going to shut down our applications, fail the cluster components away, do our patching, and then fail it back. Maybe run some health checks at the end. All right, so let's go look at it. All right, so this is BladeLogic Threat Director running in a demo environment. And as you can see, I have a range of vulnerabilities in here of different severities and different ages and in different states. Some awaiting execution, some waiting attention in the first place. So for somebody to come in and do something with them, once they've been scheduled, awaiting approval, awaiting actual execution, and then finally being closed. And that kind of gives us the nice big picture. So this is Threat Director. The other thing that's really useful and powerful for this for our purposes is, since I've built out a server smart group to just define our this particular cluster, I can come up here and leverage that by coming down to the transaction clearing cluster. And when I pick that and then I apply the filters, you're going to see I go from thousands of vulnerabilities down to just a few of them over the course of a number of scans. And if I then filter that even further and just grab all the sub-5s, that's going to give us a much tighter, much narrower view into those things. So this is what security sees. This is how they see the environment laid out, what vulnerabilities there are. Looks like these are about 11 days old on average, and they impact those two endpoints in our cluster. So now if we want to go remediate it, and we want to go see what it takes to actually get these things fixed, we can come into the operator dashboard for that. So the operator dashboard, of course, shows us all the resources we know about, all the ones that haven't been scanned and maybe need vulnerabilities looked into, and those that are mapped vulnerabilities. And the fortunate thing for us is for our transaction clearing cluster, just like any other group in here, and for our sub-5s, there's our list of vulnerabilities. Scroll down a little bit, we can see our BladeLogic Red Hat www server, all the different vulnerabilities that are needed on it. So that rolls out to be about 61 different vulnerabilities, and most of these can be addressed by Red Hat patching. So I want to go remediate all of these different critical vulnerabilities because that's important for this environment. I come through and I hit remediate. And what this is going to do, the thing that's really powerful about this is instead of doing a standard Red Hat patching job, we could certainly use a standard Red Hat patching job, right? But instead of using a Red Hat patching job that might, deploy hundreds of patches or bring higher risk with it, we're only going to remediate, for our purposes, we're only going to go in and remediate the sub-5s, right? Sub-5 vulnerabilities. So what we're doing is we're building a remediation. We know what list of different CVs we had on the previous page, about 61 vulnerabilities come through. Here's the list. If I wanted to go pick a particular vulnerability, take it off of my list and not remediate it, that'd be how I'd do it. But for our purposes, let's go ahead and include it. Hit next. Here's our job. I don't want this job to actually schedule because I'm going to have this executed either scheduled separately or maybe executed out of the operator control panel. The other thing I want to do is I want to come in and use a deploy template. And what that deploy template is going to do is it's going to set a bunch of options on the job. That's very helpful. We'll tell it things like reboots, how to stage things, all that sort of thing. Makes this very, very powerful. Of course, you have to go in and set that up in the first place, but that's not the worst thing. And then at the end of this process, I probably want to notify somebody that that this deployment is successfully completed. I'll go ahead and put my email address in there, and that's nice and easy. Add that in, and now it'll go build out the remediation. Now, obviously, this isn't the whole thing, right? We're going to go build out this remediation. We're going to see this operation get created in the operator portal, and that's super helpful. But at the same time, that doesn't do anything for the rest of our cluster operation. So there's our remediate transaction clearing cluster. It's got the name of one of the servers in it. It has not been run yet, but that doesn't have any of our compliance components associated with it. So our cluster components. So when we go over and we go look in Blade Logic, we're going to see that for this particular cluster, when we go pick and go look at one of these servers, we're going to see that we've built out app shutdown jobs and app startup jobs. Now, what that means for us is that we've basically got pointers to particular jobs that we know can safely shut down and start up this cluster. And it's kind of a loose coupling, but the thing that's super powerful about it and super helpful about it is it pulls those things out of having to be all in one big kind of monolithic script, right? And so that's super helpful as well. All right, so I have my demo app shutdown job script and my demo app startup script, and those are the scripts that are actually going to go do my my app or my cluster shutdown or failover and then start back up. I've also got a job in here that can go out and do the work that we're talking about here. And what this does, this looks at a server smart group, a depot group, and a job group, and it'll step through. It'll find all the servers in the cluster. It'll go list through them and pull out that app shutdown job and app startup job task, right? It'll identify them. It'll also go out and look for the correct patch or remediation job. And what we're going to do is we're going to go pull that list of jobs and then filter by remediation and by the name of the cluster name. So as long as you follow a good naming convention when you're building out your remediation packages, this is very easy to leverage. Very easy to leverage in picking the right remediation jobs. So as we scroll down, we say we make sure we have a good remediation job. We're going to need a name for a new batch job. That obviously can have the name of the cluster in there as a variable. And then we're going to go build out the batch job, right? We're going to go look up the app shutdown job, the remediation, and the startup. And we're going to build out a batch job to go do that. Now, that all looks kind of scary, but the net result is honestly kind of beautiful. So I'm going to go kick that off from the command line just because it's a little bit prettier. You can see I've been running it in the past already. And beauty of this, thanks to a lot of wonderful engineering work our customer engineering group and Bill Robinson and others have put into, this thing is quite fast. It's quite fast. It uses some of the best CLI performance commands. And it's going to go through and build out the transaction clearing cluster remediation batch job. And let's go look that up. Let me go click refresh. And there is now our job. And so you're going to see that here is that remediate transaction clearing cluster. This is the remediation instruction that was created by Threat Director. Here's our shutdown process, and there is our startup process. Now, the wonderful thing about this is because it's an NSH script, this can also be leveraged as a type of remediation instruction, making the thing almost completely hands-off. But for the purposes of what we're doing here, there's our app shutdown job and our start back up. And what that'll do is that will safely shut down the application, fail over the cluster, do whatever it is we need to do, all set by server properties with the Threat Director patch deployment in the middle. So using a Red Hat patching job in this particular example. And then we'll go do its app startup again on the other side. Now, the last part of this is going and building this, because as you may have noticed, There's not a batch job to do this in a smart clusterful manner. So how do we do that? There's actually a nice little utility that's part of Threat Director 2.2 that will, with a given set of arguments, go take our transaction clearing cluster remediation batch job and import it so that it shows up in the portal. So I go run this simple little command, takes a minute or two, and it will go build out that operation based on a batch job in the portal. And we see it finding the job. And there's our job successfully imported. Come back to Threat Director, hit refresh. And we now have a batch job that will let us go do that remediation. So if we were to come in here and now go execute that, obviously it hasn't been run yet, but there is our ability to go execute this process. And we could even potentially go hide the other components in here. But we come in here and hit run now, or schedule it, or whatever it is we need to do, and that is our ability to do cluster-based remediation. So that's kind of the soup to nuts of creating the remediation in the first place, and then coming back and having the batch job that will leverage all of these neat components in here. It's pretty straightforward. The other thing we can do is we can always come in and map to these individual vulnerabilities, same or similar process. And if we come in here and we look, for example, for CVE 073, we can see that we can basically map either the same or a very similar process as a type of NSH script that could then be executed to go build out this whole process and execute it in a cluster-aware fashion. So lots of options, and obviously we built this out, so we'll have these sample chunks of code available for you to play with on the communities here shortly. Again, if you have any questions, I'm Sean Berry. I work in tech marketing and as a solution evangelist for the product management group within BMC Software, and I welcome your feedback. So thanks and have a good night.